This is Trekland HQ. Yep. And we are live with my guest today, guest author, Dr. Alan. Let's do that again. Yes, Scott, one more time. Hey, everybody. It's Tuesday. This is at Trekland HQ, and we are live. Yes, with guest today, Adam Kotsko, and his book, The Late Star Trek, Final Frontier in the Franchise Era, here on show 400. Can you believe it? Yes, today on Trekland Tuesdays live with me, Dr. Trek, Larry Nemechek, coming at you here from the heart of Trekland and the home of Portal 47 and the Trekland Treks for a little bit of sanity, clarity, and a bigger picture in all things Star Trek. Hey, everybody, let me get the chat room up here because I think we are booming, blowing, and going on another Tuesday. Yeah, it's a special one. Can you believe 400 of these Tuesdays? A couple of Wednesdays and Thursdays and Mondays thrown in there along the way. Can't wait to see everybody. Special day. Now, you know, it's funny because we have different anniversaries. We have the 100 markers, like today, 400. We have the anniversary shows. And the year anniversaries, I've tended to want to show a couple of early clips and talk about how things have changed over the years. And the 100 ones, I've kind of leaned into having some guests. And I've got to say, everybody, as you join in, that today is certainly going to be one of the latter. But look, if you are here, if you're a veteran, you know, the chat is awesome. We are at this time of day so we can have folks from around the world. We can have global folks in. If you are new, though, just make sure and jump in the chat, introduce yourself. We've got a great TTL community. Everybody's pretty friendly here, and folks are here from several continents, you'll see. And if you are also new to the show, please come in on YouTube. We're multi-streaming, but YouTube and Twitch is where you'll see all the comments. If you're coming in on Facebook, you're only going to see Facebook comments, okay? And if you're on YouTube, yes, the show's not monetized. You can still cross my palm with silver and throw some much appreciated change at us through the super chat feature on the chat in YouTube. I appreciate that. And if you're watching us later, not live on YouTube, please keep the conversation going. You can still comment. I'll bop in. It'll pop up. People will still respond and go. But maybe some Tuesday, if you're able, you could join us at 1 p.m. Pacific and 4 p.m. Eastern here on Trekland Tuesdays live. In the live show and take advantage of the live chat, but we're certainly glad to see you on YouTube later. Okay. That's enough warm up. It's a guest day, which means that instead of having a soapbox and then jumping into the chat later whole hog, back scrolling in the whole bit, we'll keep an eye on the chat here as we go along, because we're just going to jump in. I'm going to go ahead and bring Adam in. So Dr. Adam Kotsko is here. His book is Late Star Trek, The Final Frontier in the Franchise Era. It's from the University of Minnesota Press. Now, what a lot of you may not be aware of, and it's perfectly fine, there's a whole realm of academic pop culture press. There's a whole realm of academic press tends to be defined chiefly, I guess, by the fact that it's a university printing press that's doing a press that's doing it. But that doesn't mean that it's not very accessible to the layperson. Some really interesting concepts and talk. So just to set that up, and just to know, and yeah, it's on all the places you can buy, right? Amazon and Google, and you can find it everywhere. But enough of that. Let's bring Adam in right now. Hey, sir, let's get us even Steven here and swap frames. All right. Well, Adam, thank you so much for doing this, for joining me today, and for doing this book.
Well, thank you for having me.
Yeah. I know you've done some interviews. I don't know, but let me just back up and let everybody see. If you go to the University of Minnesota page for your book, I tend to see here that you teach in the Scheimer Great Book School at North Central College, which is Greater Chicago, and you've written other books with titles like Neoliberalism's Demons on the Political Theology of Late Capital, Agamben's Philosophical Trajectory, and What is Theology? Christian Thought in Contemporary Life. So my first question is, from that realm, how in the world did you get to, in fact, it's not only Star Trek, but late Star Trek? And I'm so glad you did, because I've been enjoying, I haven't got to read the whole thing, but I've been enjoying what I see. And I'm excited for someone to be writing about this. Is that why you jumped in?
Yeah, I think that I saw that a lot of this material just hadn't gotten the attention that it deserved. And especially Enterprise, I think it's the redheaded stepchild of the franchise. And as I was kind of connecting with fan communities um, in the last 10 years or so, and I noticed how extremely hostile people were about Enterprise. Like, one of the top fan theories that people like to do before Discovery came out was to write Enterprise out of the timeline, either through First Contact or through the Temporal Cold War. In any case, it just was not part of the main timeline, because Scott Bakula can just never be the captain. Like, this is just unacceptable.
You need to hang around with some better class of fandom. That's all I'm going to say. But
yeah. So I took the contrarian viewpoint that Enterprise is fine, and that even if it's not the best of Star Trek, it doesn't deserve such scorn. And I kind of started analyzing, like, what are they going for? Like, instead of taking this attitude of like, I imagine that the prequel would be this way, I imagine that things would look like this in 2151, instead saying, okay, what did they actually do? What was kind of the reasoning behind that? Is there a way to make this make sense? And the more I kind of pushed on that, the more I thought, like, even if they took it in unexpected directions, in some cases, they were making a good faith effort to kind of create this new and different type of show in the Star Trek universe, and to try to think through what it would look like for humanity to be in like this early stage instead of an established stage. And yeah, and so really, my real wish would have been to write the entire book on Enterprise. That's my true love of this of this era, but I felt like probably nobody would purchase that, so I thought I would expand it out to include everything else too. Yeah.
Well, because one of the so back up here, I'm going to say that, and I've read this, so I know your bio didn't mention this, but you have your own fandom credit, at least as far as being a viewer of the show, right? Original series with family, Next Gen was yours, and then life took you away from being able to follow the later shows as closely. Is that?
Yeah, it was. One of my earliest memories is watching the original series with my dad, and then watching Next Generation when I was a teenager became like a kind of weekly ritual. I got a little too busy and maybe a little not wanting to associate myself with Star Trek and other such nerdy topics, short-sightedly at the time.
Yeah.
But then came back to it as an adult and wound up rewatching all of the shows. I was caught up by the time Discovery came out. It was a very unique experience to be able to watch it week to week again and have new Star Trek finally, for first time in so long.
Well, I got to say, if you were on an adventure watching the reaction to Enterprise, it must have felt like that times steroids.
Oh, yes. Yeah, Discovery was definitely very divisive. And I was part of this fan community called the Daystrom Institute. It's a Reddit forum, and they try to keep a very like high quality conversation. No memes, no jokes. Everybody stay on topic. You have to support your answer. You have to like write something substantive if you're going to join the conversation. And so, for me as an academic, that felt like a
very atypical Reddit too. Also,
yeah, definitely different from most Reddit forums. But yeah, they had a weekly, just response post, and I was like the only one out there in the trenches saying, "Oh, this is interesting. This is really cool what they're doing. Like, who cares about the visuals? Who cares that the Klingons look weird? Like, this is a cool story." And so I guess that's what's motivating. And then of course when Picard came out, I was one of the only people who didn't like it. So I guess I had to like put my contrarian viewpoint down in print.
Well, because for one thing, let's just start with the title, Late Star Trek. Now, somebody that doesn't know, and you've got some context here in the tagline, Final Frontier in the franchise era. So I saw this, just my first blush was, are you implying that late Star Trek means that it's died? As in like, but no, chronologically, and then the franchise era. So there's several things going on, and I know I've only got you for maybe a little over half hour. And there's so many things I wanted to get to, but one thing is, yes, I was glad to see somebody start. It's been long enough since Discovery premiered, and that's where my head went when I read this. It's been long. It's been 8 years, and there's been enough. And we move. It's the 21st century. Things move fast, and it's been long enough to start having some reflective time, and have some hindsight to look at, because it's certainly been a ride. And one thing that I do, I mean, I can geek out as much. I can canonize and canonista, and we do that on the Trek Files, my other podcast, and my Portal 47 is all about deep diving with the creatives. But for a lot of times, I realize a lot of fans don't understand the linkage of the industry, and people look at the Trek they knew or they came in with, and they judge everything else by that, and may not realize that younger generations are coming. There's so many things at play that I've tried to do with Tuesday Live here, and like, maybe in case you weren't noticing, this has happened, and I wasn't noticing, and this happened, and that's why this excited me so much, because I think it's time to do that. However, you're defining late Star Trek, not with the end of not starting up after the Berman era to the JJ era, like with the films, with the Kelvin films, but you started with Enterprise. Is that because I know now that's where you really wanted to that's what you really wanted to do. But why do you start with Enterprise as far as justifying the whole book?
Well, I think that there's a lot of books that are about like kind of the whole franchise, and they came out during the mid 2000s, kind of after Enterprise was canceled, and when the JJ verse movies were the only thing that was available. And it felt like people were doing a retrospective, and like, this is what Star Trek was. It's probably mainly over. And it went well at first, and then it gradually declined until it like died with Enterprise. And I thought that one thing that attracted me to starting the story with Enterprise is that that's clearly where the contemporary creators are starting. Like in the JJ verse movies, all of them have like references to Enterprise, and in fact, the third one is like the whole plot is structured around like references to the Enterprise period. Like Discovery has a ton of references to Enterprise that even follows directly with their Mirror Universe episodes. Like that, even though this is something that the fans seem to want to get rid of, the current producers view it as like a touchstone and like a continual point of reference.
Yeah.
And I think that it's more than just the fact that like all of these series are set in like the original series episodes or the original series era, so that Enterprise is the only thing that happened like in the past, and so it's kind of the only thing that's available.
And before the Kelvin divergence.
Right, yeah. But I think that there's more to it, because the more I thought about what Enterprise was doing, the more it was kind of transforming Star Trek into a different kind of franchise, one where there would be much more explicit continuity, and there would be like that all of these like cross references to when the Federation was founded would like matter, because we would like go back and see that happening. And it happened around the same time that that Star Wars was also doing this prequel and kind of like building out its universe, and we were getting like there's a lot of the Batman reboots that were beginning, like it was right at the beginning of an era when like franchise style storytelling, where you're expecting to see multiple installments that are all going to fit together, and it's a shared universe, and people were kind of getting used to this. And I think that Star Trek was a pioneer in so many things in TV, and I think it was a pioneer in this too, and kind of like shifting into this mode of franchise storytelling and operating as a franchise, and kind of leaning on continuity and things like this.
Yeah. Well, we didn't think about having two series and then having a movie at the time. Just seemed like a natural outgrowth. And now we look back. Yeah, Star Trek invented so many situations, algorithms, landscapes that now we have a buzzword for it, but at the time we didn't.
Right.
It wrote including the internet. But let me jump back, because I heard another interviewer that you had, and you had kind of a three-prong approach to how you would do this to differentiate what you want to do with maybe other, because this isn't about, let's analyze the story. I mean, you obviously had parts of that, but you're really trying to take a meta look, but with a very specific, with your own methodology, with your own filter, the three strategic threads you said.
Yeah, in terms of how I would write the book, I was talking about like there are a lot of people who write in terms of trying to show like Star Trek was ahead of its time. It was very politically progressive. Like, look at this, and that's true. Although I think that in the more recent stuff, it has been less overtly politically progressive or less kind of ahead of its time in that way. It seems like, especially in Enterprise, that was less of an emphasis. But in terms of how they put together the stories and like the framework that I use to understand what they're talking about, I'm interested in how they tell their stories and how they decide to fit their stories in. And it seems to me that there are like three strategies that they tend to use. And the first one we're all familiar with, we all love it, fan service, where they're just like, we're going to give you more of the same. You like this? Okay, we're just going to extend it. You like Captain Picard? We're going to show you Captain Picard, that kind of thing. And the danger of that mode of storytelling is that it becomes redundant. You're like, I've already seen the original episodes. Like, if you're not going to add anything new, what are we even doing here? Why don't I just rewatch the old ones?
Yeah.
And so then there's like this quest to find a more innovative storytelling method to kind of show like Star Trek can do more things than you ever thought it could. This isn't your father's Star Trek, and try to find some creative freedom to do things very differently. And I think that the danger with that is then like if you break too far, people wonder like, why are you even doing Star Trek if you don't want to do anything that Star Trek used to do at all? And I think that's some of the complaints that people had, especially about the first two J.J. Abrams movies. Is like, how is this Star Trek other than the fact that it's just like a blockbuster with Star Trek skin? Like, how does this like capture the spirit of it?
Yeah.
And I think that the way that they try to strike a balance between that is to say, yes, we're giving you something new, but it's new information about the universe. It's world building and clarifying things that we didn't know before. And I think like Discovery makes a big move to say like, okay, we're going to retcon and say like, here's where the conflict between the Federation and the Klingons happened. It wasn't just a Cold War the whole time. They had a real war, and the Klingons almost won. And like that changes everything. And so you need to be on board with that. You need to, like it shows why you need to watch because it's transforming the franchise. But I think that as time went on, the need to make these big moves and say like, this is redefining everything about Star Trek, or like everything is at stake. It means that the stories get so overloaded with these like exaggerated stakes, like the entire galaxy is going to blow up every season of every show, and you're just like exhausted by it.
Well, several things came to mind here, but one thing here. So you at one point early on in the introduction, you said, "Let me start with this because it's kind of a throwback, and because there's so much good stuff here, and I don't have you for very long. We'll have to do this again sometime, or in another venue or something. I wish you were more West Coast so we could do con panels. But have you done any convention panels type situation?
No, I haven't. I mean, the book just came out, but
Okay.
yeah.
Okay. Well, you should think about that, or what's around, Greater Chicago, the Midwest, whatever. You did mention, just as kind of a throwaway, that you had your own, fandom history. You said your partner is a big Trek fan, but does not want to watch the original series. And I know that's a big chunk of newer fans coming into Trek, or even not even so much new, still the last 20 years. And do you think the role of the original series is just, and I know that wasn't a focus of the book, but do you think that's just inevitable? Or do you think, because one of my themes has been how the pendulum has already swung as time goes by. It's not often that you're lucky enough to have a 60-year franchise to even have these areas of, conversation. But the original series was hot and then became old yesterday's news with Next Gen at its peak. And then the original became retro cool when the Next Gen era, had a little bit of malaise. And that's why Abrams, JJ went to that era only as an alternate universe. So it's interesting now because we have so many people say, I understand, I intellectually appreciate the original series, but I just can't stand to watch it. What do you, is that for your partner or what do you think about that reaction to the?
Yeah, I think that there's a couple different factors. One is just that the style is very different.
Right.
The production values, although high for their time, don't hold up as well as the other shows. And I think that sometimes the cultural norms of that time were just different in a way that is distracting. I think that my partner's big complaint is about Kirk and the perception that he's, falling in love with every woman that he meets, and like there's this weird conflict of interest in half of their missions where he's like sleeping with the woman he's
But
negotiating
you
with.
told her it was strategic, right?
It's
He only had
strategic.
3 or 4 big loves, and the rest was all strategic. It's
Yeah,
like the
only 3 or 4.
OSS or something. It's like the partisans or something. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you probably read this essay. It's called Kirk Drift, and it's defending Kirk on those lines and
I
saying he
think I
wasn't a
haven't read it, but
womanizer.
I think I understand. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think though that there is something about it that is so iconic too. Like the kind of that Kirk is like bouncing between the logical Spock and the emotional McCoy, and there's these big primary colors and this kind of big like moral messages and allegories and things like that, and that has an appeal. And I think that that's where Strange New Worlds comes in, is that they've really kind of tried to thread the needle of doing shows that feel more like the original series, but that it's updated and cool and sexy in a way that maybe that's how it felt when you were watching it back in the 60s, but that it just doesn't intuitively feel that way anymore. And like, I think that there's one scene in Strange New Worlds where the crew is addicted to light. Do you watch this episode? They've got a virus and they're addicted to light, which is like this kind of big, almost stupid, like swing that I think our original series would have done.
Hold on, we've got a musical coming because of an alien virus.
Yes, right, exactly, like that kind of thing. But like when they're just sitting there like basking in this light and just like eating it up, or like where the engineer is going to blow up the warp core so you can have even more light, it's just like, yes, this is what I've been missing. This is the kernel of the original series that we need to like get back, and I think they did a great job of kind of reinvigorating that.
And you say that, and that's what Lower Decks does almost every other episode. But then, Ransom becomes the godhead, kind of, the literal thing. But people, it's animation, that's fine. But it's like, but that's, the floating Lincoln chair. It's, the green hand of, it's manipulated matter meant to draw on your memory of your culture. Anyway, people think, look, it's the big hand. It's Lincoln in the chair. It's whatever. So let me do this because we don't have a forever. Let me just, so you also include the novel verse, which was fascinating to me, and I understand all your intellectual reasons why. One thing I don't know about how much you underlined as you looked at the series, I mean, I know it had to, was since you mentioned the franchise era and what kind of a point you were getting to about has the original series and then the Berman era, and they were all the meta of the capitalist system being part of a series that's supposedly set in a post-scarcity environment, and how that's ironic at times and meta and frustrating at times and baffling. And this current era is of the streaming era pretty much, and how that plays into the choices. But number one, there's still a chunk of fandom that feels like it gave up. Like they didn't like the Kelvin movies, the JJ movies. And for some reason, because Kurtzman was one of the 5, involved. And then he and then Bob Orsi's, they've split ways. In fact, he's passed on now. But Alex Kurtzman was part of that. So all of these not only are just outgrowths of what they didn't like about Kelvin, but now they're all the same. And I love people who, I don't know if they don't actually watch, which is always suspect. But everything now, we've got this, I've called it the buffet of Star Treks. You call, different flavors. You were referring to this too. But there are still some people that lump all the modern Treks as one big thing. And I said, well, actually, it's different flavors, different tones, different showrunners. And I also think they've mastered the other intersection with the modern age, which is this emphasis on streaming, on serializing versus the standalone, to the point where Strange New has even come back to serializing, and Lower Decks kind of embraced it as a matter of course, and we'll see what Academy does. But I just, the fandom that tells me tell me you haven't watched the current shows without telling me, and this embrace that they're all just one of a kind, and it's all Kurtzman, and they need someone else different. You know what I'm saying? Because I think by now it's been long enough that that's a folly to say that, but you can't tell people. I just wondered if you can very much tell not only different tones, but like a growth in how they're handled. You kind of lump the three most recent ones at the end. So I'll
Yeah,
shut
I mean, I just put them into the same chapter for convenience because they just had less material available at that time. But I also put them in there because they were the ones that I liked the best. And I think they show the variety the best, you know, like
and
Strange New
talking Lower
World.
Decks, Prodigy, and Strange New.
Yeah, yeah. And, you know, like we already talked about how unique the style of Strange New Worlds is and the fact that they went back to an episodic format. Lower Decks is mainly episodic too, and it's obviously in a very different format. It's, you know, it looks kind of like a Rick and Morty Star Trek. And then, you know, Prodigy is another animated show, but it's aimed at a different audience and has a radically different, you know, style. It's not the hand drawn animation; it's computer generated animation, like many kids shows are now today. And even between, you know, I think Discovery and Picard are maybe like more similar than they should be, given that they're in such radically different time periods. But even then, they're experimenting with different types of storytelling. And I think that Discovery season one, at least, did a really good job of doing a serialized story where everything fits together and where there's a twist that if you go back and rewatch, like everything looks different, you know, so it kind of rewards rewatching. I know we're all Star Trek fans. We obsessively rewatch these things. And I think some of the later seasons don't stand up as well to that. But yeah, the idea that this is all the same, like, if anything, the 90s shows all felt like they were just part of one big show, right? Like the background on Deep Space Nine was different because it was the Cardassian station, but other than that, the acting style was the same, the pacing style was the same, like everything, the music style was the same, like it was all just kind of relatively uniform. And I think that in the contemporary age, you know, I have serious questions about what Kurtzman has done too, but the one thing that he's really done is open up and show how varied Star Trek can be on TV and how many different concepts it can kind of embrace.
Yeah. Let me do this to save time. Let me start with Enterprise, and then have you. Don't want to put you on the spot. Let me run through the series, at least some of these, and have you give a 20 or 30 word log line on like your basic. Given your filter here, like what would be the nameplate, the paragraph for each series, like in summary, okay? And then if something pops up, we can go into it. But I'm trying to save time. Because a little different angle to all these. So base it the way you're discussing them, and the franchise era, which some of these terms you're throwing. Let me back up a second. Do you mean the franchise era to have a negative connotation, or just be descriptive?
I think it's descriptive, and I try in the book not to just, you know, there are people who say that franchise style storytelling is just by definition bad. It's derivative. It's just churning out material that nobody really wants. You know, like
now, define franchise style storytelling.
Well, I think that a franchise is a kind of ongoing entertainment property that claims to tell stories that are within a shared fictional world or universe, and that exists across multiple media. And so Star Trek was, by that definition, Star Trek was a franchise almost from the very beginning, because there were, you know, there's the show, there's the animated show, there's the novels and comic books that came out almost immediately. And so, like, Star Trek is kind of one of the first examples of a franchise, and it's certainly one of the most long running. I would say that only like DC Comics and Marvel Comics have had as long or a longer run than Star Trek. And what you would call this
the Brits love to say Doctor Who too, and I said, yeah, but it took the Americans to show them how to market, because no one knew for the first 10 years. But yeah,
and I mean, it was state produced too, so I guess there wasn't as much pressure to market. But yeah, and I think the franchise era would be like the recent decades when it seems like every movie is a franchise movie. You know, like there's stats like that 8 out of 10 of the top 10 movies every year are sequels or based on an existing property or something like that. And so, yeah, it's about how Star Trek, which kind of invented the concept of a franchise, but winds up being kind of an innovator, but also kind of a laggard in that space, in an era when franchises are just
Well,
dominating the
it
cultural
was right
stage.
when the parents were fighting and got the divorce and
You
were
mean
neglecting their kid when every other family was boosting their kids.
the split rights, you mean, between the TV and yeah, what a stupid situation. Like, why did they let that happen? I don't understand.
You kind of mentioned so again, like a 20-30 word description through your filter, through your judging stream thread there, strategy. So what's your bottom line to Enterprise?
Yeah, what for my narrative in the book, what Enterprise does is like they started a new era of Star Trek, but didn't understand what they were doing, and so this led to nothing but kind of conflict and recriminations. But they did start Star Trek down a new path. I don't know if that was probably over 30 words. I'm sorry.
That's exactly what I mean, because there's so much involved here and so many things I wouldn't have. Part of go ahead. I mean, part of the formula here is not just on the creators. It's like, what's the culture? What's the media world doing? What's the channel or the distribution platform, and what's going on? But and the one thing that you did, which I just inherently don't, because of, to me, I remember the last book I read because it was polluting my mind, because what's on, in Star Trek, what's on screen is dominant. You can, a crass thing is we're selling books and comics to make more money because we know you'll want it. We'll try to give you decent quality, as opposed to the early days when they just slapped it on and sold anything. And with the caveat that this is not canon. And then as we say goodbye to the series and cast families, as you talk about, the aughts and the teens were incredible. No one ever thought there'd be more Picard Next Gen stories, and there are. So, and one thing I didn't know if you took into account was that basically, why aren't those, utilized? Well, because of the union and the pay structure. If the screens go back and utilize creations from novelists, then they've got to start paying them, and then it gets dicey. And so they just want to have it's somewhere between the ego of production TV people and the reality of having to go back and pay. They didn't have T'Pau be a character on Enterprise. It became T'Pol because they didn't want to pay the Ted Sturgeon estate, for using T'Pau every episode, et cetera, et cetera. So that's one of the underlying things, but that doesn't stop people from going and picking one off. Some writer who had been a fan kid 20 years earlier, and now they're working on Enterprise or Discovery or whatever, will pull out the Andorian weapon knife from a game manual, and use that. So that happens, but that's kind of why that does. So inherently, most fans, some mourn it because they enjoy the books as much or more than. But inherently, I go, this is just filler to tide you over until we get back to the real thing. But it was interesting the way you stopped to say in the fallow years, especially, that the books were the novels, the pro novels.
Yeah, I think that my underlying for the novel verse is like that the novels are not filler, and I think that they're written by talented people. Some of them, especially like in the early '80s, that was kind of a golden era, and I think there was a second golden era after the Next Generation shows kind of wound up, and they could like develop this big continuity. So, yeah, I think that the novels are really important to fans. I think that fans read them, and that fans' ideas of the franchise are like deeply shaped by that, even though they're kind of like to tide you over. Like, you wind up spending way more time with a novel than you do with any episode, right? Like, you can't read a novel in an hour, and it can go into more detail. It can, like, I remember reading Peter David's Vendetta and thinking, oh, finally I'm going to get to learn about the Borg, which, come to find out they're only in like 5 episodes. And I was like trying to watch the reruns and see if I could find a Borg episode, but I had control. I had kind of like, I could decide what I wanted to learn about from Star Trek through these novels.
Yeah.
And I think that was really important to people, and it's always been important to fans.
Yeah, I was going to say, the accountants aside, that's not to say that the newer generation of writers who were kids in the 90s and the aughts, and sometimes they'll even admit it, weren't also affected by the way the novels were shaped, and either leaned into them, or maybe leaned 180 away because they didn't want to be accused of, not that that's the universe we use, but that they don't want to be accused of ripping off a novel, so they steer completely away from that. But anyway, let me move on down the line to, and I'm going to just skip the Kelvin movies because we kind of talked about them. But your bottom line to Discovery then.
Bottom line is, Discovery showed that Star Trek can be a prestige level, high quality property, and then they ran away from it. I just view the trajectory of Discovery since season 1 as just utterly tragic and baffling.
That's interesting because knowing the production history and how, the season 1 was basically a train wreck that never would have happened if it hadn't been a Star Trek because of all the internal chaos, which same way as the motion picture was. It was a chaotic mess. And if it hadn't been a Star Trek, someone would have pulled the plug on it. And the fact that it landed at all is kind of amazing.
Mm-hmm.
And anyway, this is all fodder for future whatever. And that I thought it got more Trekish as it went along. But I also know that I'm way overdue for a rewatch. I'm really wanting to sit down and rewatch and give everything a second, with the dust settled of 8 years and all the expectation game. But now Picard, because Picard in hindsight, I look at is I laugh and say that it's actually, somebody said, do you like Picard? And I go, which version? To me, it's almost like 3 different series, but what's your bottom line on Picard?
Yeah. Picard, it seems like it's just reinventing itself every season. And they finally landed on, it took them, 3 seasons to finally do what everybody thought they were going to do and do a reunion show. And I think that I had somebody who wrote a review of my book said that he read it because he heard that I was utterly savage about Picard. And I did, as I was writing the chapter, I realized I really, really disliked Picard and disliked all the choices they made. And the second season in Los Angeles, this is what we want from Captain Picard. This is crazy. And all of this wrangling in season 3 to get them on the bridge of the original Enterprise. It's just what are we even doing here, guys?
Well, that the show developed out of the gate because that's what Patrick wanted. He basically wanted a Loganization of Picard and TNG. He wanted,
interesting.
Yeah, he didn't want a reunion. He wanted to show the character Picard. If you're going to come, because they came to him, let's do a Picard show. And he said, basically, okay, well, I will do it, but we're not going to be, my phrase, the happy dappy crew on the happy dappy bridge having happy dappy adventures every week. It's an old man. We're going to look at what's happened in his life and the things since he saw his crew, and they're part of his life, but they're all not living together 30 years later.
I mean, that makes sense, but
yeah, it took a season and then internal, let's do this, and then compromises, and COVID happened. And then Terry Matalas was able to come in and say, okay, we did what you wanted for 2 years. How about we do this? And by then it was kind of like, okay. That's a rough short form, but that's
interesting. I can't believe I didn't think of the connection with Logan because it's so obvious in retrospect.
But see, as an actor, Patrick is going to say, well, I don't want to recreate it. And also as an actor who is something very successful or a producer, you don't want to tempt fate. You don't want to take the great gleaming edifice, the icon, and do anything to go, oh, why did you go ruin it? Why, So it's here's what we'll do. We won't go anywhere near that. We'll show anyway, that was,
I think
it was interesting. Yeah. You could have that intention, and then the way you develop it is still up to,
Yeah, I was game for their concept in season 1. I thought they took a big swing, and I thought it was really interesting. And it just kind of, the pacing and the confusing storytelling and the killing him just to resurrect him 2 minutes later. There's just so much that went in really confusing directions. I think that season 1 was promising and they just didn't execute. I think that season 2, I don't understand why they even made it. And season 3, I do understand why they made it, but I just felt it was kind of unsatisfying fan service, at least to me.
Yeah. Well, now that's another thing, because talking about negative connotation, and I'm going to let you go here. I'm sorry. This is what I knew would happen. But one other thing I wanted to ask you was, you use fan service as a term a lot, and to me, that's got a negative pejorativeness to it, the same way that Mary Sue is a pejorative term, and yet we have many Mary Sue stories that get made professionally. And fan service to me, as a say of like Picard third season, and to me it's like it's just gratuitous. Oh, here, let's pile this on. But to me, the whole point of being in Star Trek, which gets back to the basic here, is I'm a fan because after a few weeks, you enjoy the show, you enjoy the watching after school, right? As a kid, original series, no bloody A, B, C, or D, the original series, and you enjoy the characters, you enjoy the stories, and I'm talking about at that age and at that time, sure. But what really made me a fan was when I found the Making of Star Trek book and thought, holy cow, they planned all this. And the believability factor. And at the time, it was purely for survival, because Gene wanted to tell racism stories and war stories and, economics. And he'd gotten canceled on the Lieutenant. And he said, well, if I put it in science, because he'd been a kid science, he'd been a Gulliver's Travels, Swifty and all of that. And if I make it an allegory and put it with purple aliens and spaceships, no one will get it, but the audience will get it. The censors won't get it, but the audience will get it. But it's sci-fi, and sci-fi either had a zero impression or in the view of the mainstream public, or a negative, the bug-eyed monsters. So they leaned into making everything as believable as we could, and that was the thing. And it's the mantra in the DNA of Star Trek. And that's what grabbed me, because I couldn't believe. And, the world, nobody said world building then, but we have that term now, and so many others. So to me, I've seen people talk recently about the Discovery mess out of the gate, and how they said, no, we'll be canon. And for the first time, I realized that some people in their mind, whether they consciously believed or understood it or not, they were very precise about, yes, here's where Michael Burnham as a foster daughter is going to fit in, into the Sarek family. And then eventually we'll say why you never talked about her. But you already had Cybok coming out of nowhere in Star Trek 5. And to me, it was amazing how they were so anal to the good with concept canon and timelines and chronology, but visual canon was just like, what's that? And to me, they were all one and the same. Because the thing that sets Star Trek apart from and I'm soapboxing here, and then I'll let you go. Sorry, I didn't mean to make you endure this.
I'm not in a rush. If you want to keep going, I can keep going.
I want to get your reaction to this, because to me, you can be a fan of many things and we have lots. And I was amazed to find, because I was never a comics fan, because those are silly people running around in pajamas, all one-off individuals. And Star Trek was us through NASA into space, as a Kirk speech would always remind you. And we had Napoleon and Hitler, but then they had Lee Kwan and Colonel Green and and they would do those historic sweeps to remind you that you were them, and they weren't a galaxy. Although I enjoyed Star Wars, it wasn't a galaxy far, far away. Yeah. It was, a long time ago. It was us into the future, and that's what drove. Sometimes it was a little corny, but it drove it. And Picard the same way, when he's yelling at the stock guy in Neutral Zone about we no longer are obsessed with materialism, and yet that kind of dawned on you. But the fact that you would read those memos from Dorothy and Gene and Bob and all of them, and Gene talking about, here's the names of Vulcans, and here's the names of the ships in the fleet. And they messed up, but they tried really hard. And that became the DNA, as opposed to everything else that was either not trying, or it wasn't worth your time, or I don't know. I was amazed to find out from my comic book friends 20 years ago, 10 years ago, that they had the same reaction to Marvel and DC universes as I did to Star Trek. And I was like, how do you get that out of, and that's fine. That's wonderful. So then I thought, like, what is different about, well, Star Trek is the only one that's tried to keep, it gets creaky at times, but tried to keep that. And even with the JJ movies, they were just going to do a reboot, like you said, like, oh, it's another Batman. It's another Spider-Man reboot. And just don't ask questions. But it's like, no. Shatner and Nimoy are eventually going to die. We might want other people to play Kirk, but they're going to be in the same stream. And thank God, Kurtzman and Orsi said, Alec, JJ, why don't we make these movies an alternate universe? It's like, thank you. Then I don't have to care. I can just watch them and not have to care. So to me, I've heard people say like third season Picard, oh, it's just fan service. It's just member berries. It's just canon porn. It's, whatever. And I'm like, no, if these were compelling characters when they were in their 40s and 30s, are they not as compelling just because they're in their 70s and 80s? And to me, that's not fan service. That's a phrase I have called "use the universe."
Right.
It's like, don't be afraid of it, but don't wallow in it, but don't be afraid of it either. And that's what so to me, fan service becomes a pejorative, and like you've overdone it where you could. So I noticed that you used it just as a descriptor. So that's cool.
Right.
But I just wonder, everything I've blurted here, I'm just wondering what your thought is.
Yeah, I agree that one thing that makes Star Trek distinctive is the attempt to maintain this kind of continuity and make sure and maintain the continuity with us too. And
I mean, there's other aspirational franchises, and that's wonderful, and people find inspiration and enjoyment and entertainment from them. I just, for the last 10 years, struggle to find out what makes Star Trek unique among all of them, especially as Star Trek's been away from the big boys table the last 10, 15 years, and it's finally getting back there. And that's what I came up with, was that on top of everything else, it's a universe you can depend on, not to be wackily different from showrunner to showrunner. Even though sometimes in the moment it seems that way, but eventually it levens out. Okay.
Yeah. And I think that Discovery kind of was spoiling for a fight in a certain way, and they wanted to like be in your face about the changes they were making, and they were trying to break fans' obsession with literalism about the visuals, and that failed, and they basically just like kind of pulled it back. And now, I think that Strange New Worlds is a plausible modernized version of the original series that you could say, okay, I guess it always looked like that. We just weren't able to produce that back then, or something like that. There's like that you can bridge the gap in a way you couldn't with the early Discovery visuals. And I just think that was one area where it was just kind of foolish of them to pick that fight for no clear reason. I think that out of my three strategies, like trying to have fan service, trying to have creative freedom, trying to do world building, whenever one of them is done just by itself, I don't think it ever works.
Like it's an extreme.
Like I think that the lengths they go to get everybody on the original Enterprise D bridge are so absurd that they break believability, and like they just like are shoving it in your face, like we are doing this for the sake of doing it so we could get this shot. And like that, to me, that's not using the universe. That's just that moment. Like, and even it's a very serious crisis, and Picard is joking about the carpet. Like that doesn't make sense either. Like that doesn't fit with the story that they're trying to tell. And I think that like that kind of fan service, I think is a little cheap, and I think it's insulting to the viewers. Like Star Trek fans are smarter than that. And even if it feels good to see that in the moment, I think that most people, when they go back and rewatch Picard, will say like, "Oh my God, this didn't quite live up to what it could have been."
Too much.
And for the reasons that you're saying, that it doesn't kind of take the universe seriously in the same way that fans have come to expect.
Yeah. Well, that's why I love what the passage of time, like I mentioned, the original series, DS9 and Voyager people, especially DS9, when they started to serialize just even before the Dominion War, when they would have recurring character arcs of those 40 characters they wound up having, whatever, people would miss a week or two on the old viewing schedule, like once a week, but you're on a crappy station that's it's the NHL or the NBA station, and they bump that week's DS9 to 2 a.m. and you miss it, and you have no hope of knowing when it's going to even to tape it. And after 2 or 3 weeks, I knew lots of people that just threw up their hands and said, I can't keep up. I missed 2 shows and I'm lost. And that is, you tell that to somebody who's 20 today, and it's kind of like telling them how long distance dialing costs more than local. It's like, it's a paradigm they can't understand. What? And so Netflix was the big revolution for DS9 and Voyager and even Enterprise, getting over that. So the passage of time, and whether it's external, tech or culture or whatever, is a plus and a minus both. as time goes by. And I can't wait to see. There are a lot of times I intellectually knew that young girls and women appreciated having Janeway as a female captain. African Americans too, having Cisco there, but almost even more so that. But it was an intellectual thing, and it took 20 years to be in my face and be at cons and meet fans. And I said this it's the one line of mine they kept in the Voyager documentary about how my view of Voyager, instead of being the thing I saw the sausage made, and I intellectually knew that would be a hallmark of the show, and it's very much a living. How many women of importance and young girls talk about that now, and astronauts in orbit and politicians and whatever talk about Janeway as a landmark for them. And at the time, it's kind of like, yeah, this is going to be that's the first woman captain. That's going to be important. And it just takes time sometimes to realize, or to have your view pulled out of the rosy spectacles, or, the rose-colored glasses, or anyway, it's just.
Yeah, I had students tell me about liking Voyager. Like, I've always been surprised that it's the most popular on streaming, and I'm like, Voyager, wasn't that kind of like the Second Degree spinoff? But people find it relatable today because they explored themes like, depression and anxiety. Like, the setup of the show meant that people were feeling a lot of big emotions and kind of having to deal with them in a way that other shows didn't. And even if they didn't have continuity in the same way that Deep Space Nine did, because I think they were spooked by what happened with Deep Space Nine and how people just kind of gave up. Even though the concept lends itself to serialization very well, I think that still the sense of like people saying, we're still lost out here. We're still 70 years away from home. Like, we're still feeling things and trying to deal with it and trying to figure out what our life means out here. And I think for younger generations who have been much more kind of focused on mental health, maybe than we were when we were growing up, that they find that really resonates still.
Well, and the idea that Dax or Seven would become such great gender, gay or trans or whatever on the LGBTQ, community, that they would become icons, that no one saw that in the, the 90s or whatever. And now the newer series are doing things more, I hate to say on the nose, because that can be a negative connotation too, but you just don't know where the ripples. That's one of those cases where when you throw the stone, you don't know how far out the ripples, or the butterfly effect or whatever.
Right.
You don't know how far those ripples are going to carry. Oh, listen, can I ask you one more thing before I leave you? So one of the things, you mentioned them a couple of times, so they just hadn't happened. We didn't, as a whole, the franchise era is, we've had the strikes, we've had streaming blow up as the model, or is it the emperor wearing no clothes? The way, the economics of the capitalism behind, because that it's not just, it's streaming. It's like that's driving shorter seasons. It's driving a lot of times the serialization, or just serializations itself, because that was a major part of Discovery's growing pains, was we'd had Lost, we'd had Game of Thrones, but we'd never had a serialized Star Trek. And I think they had to figure out, I think that took seasons and series to figure out, what serialized Star Trek would look like. But having said all that, two things recently. Section 31, the movie. What's your take?
I think it's absolutely horrible. I think it should just be deleted, and
for the first time, actually delete.
I think they should pull it. They should declare it's not canon. They should salt the earth wherever it was filmed. I couldn't even get like morbid fascination pleasure from it. It was just, I don't understand why they did it.
Do you have any idea that 10 years from now, we might look at that differently?
I don't know. Do you look back at like Nemesis and suddenly you think it's good? Like,
the worst Star Treks have always had, I used to say that at least in And the Children Shall Lead, we got the UFP banner. I mean, that was my, like, here's one thing. Here's the thing. Okay. The other thing was, and this has just happened, and I'm going to go with the theory that this is true because I haven't seen any pushback to it. But there's been talk reported from, wacky things like union bulletins and rental spaces where things get broken where they're not supposed to be leaked. Because people are just doing their jobs and they're not in the business of keeping somebody's big secret, but this idea that there's a move afoot, a new series that's would try out on YouTube and be aimed for kids, maybe even younger than Prodigy was aimed. Have you seen that just in the last couple of weeks?
I have not heard.
You've been busy.
Yeah.
But basically, and that's all there is to it. The idea that there is some no name attached to it as a creator or whatever, but the idea that somewhere Paramount, and again, part of this is right now is the fact that I'm amazed that we even have a series going and a series coming because of the flux that not just Paramount and its ownership are in, and what that means for decisions for Star Trek. It's way above Alex Kurtzman's pay grade, and his contract ends into next year.
Oh wow.
But that streaming is in a flux, and even who's owning, the industry is in flux, and then who owns Paramount on top of that, and who's making the decisions. And it's amazing. I'm amazed we have new Star Trek at all right now. So that had nothing to do with Section 31 though. But if someone is feeling like they're making decisions, or if these are small enough, no budget, low budget decisions they can make and do it within the current whatever. But apparently the story is there's some group developing a for kids series, but it'll be on YouTube.
I think that would be a good move. Yeah.
Yeah. And as far as like the future and the industry evolving and the delivery systems evolving, because my granddaughter Alice, that I do Cadet Alice with in Prodigy, that's what when she has her pad time, she's on YouTube watching whatever, and it's like, well, and it's parent guided. But that's where, if you're really trying to do the new generation of fans, that makes, as a basic, that makes a lot of sense to me. Do you agree, or what do you think?
Yeah, if they're really doing that, I think that would be another instance of Star Trek, being innovative, of like pioneering the direct to syndication, and then kind of being one of the first attempts to create a boutique streaming service. We can debate with the merits of that decision, but it was relatively innovative at the time. And if it's reaching a broader audience that's outside of the walled garden of Paramount Plus, I'm all for that.
Yeah.
I didn't like the YouTube series of Very Short Treks. Did you watch that?
Yeah. You were not alone. Or most of them anyway. It was.
I just don't. Yeah, again, I keep saying this. I don't know what they were thinking, but that's why I wrote the book, is to try to figure out what they were thinking. But
I think that was a marketing group locked in a room somewhere that didn't get out and have dinner in the outside. Did you talk about? See, there's a lot of idea. I'm gonna finish this because I haven't got to read it all.
It had not come out at the time that I.
Oh, okay. See, you didn't get to it. So Very Short Treks fits your filter model, your methodology here.
Yeah.
As far as being explainable, not that you. Yeah.
Well, I'm glad that I didn't have to try to explain Very Short Treks in my book, because I think I would have failed, short of, hypothesizing that they're doing drugs or something. But.
Well, speaking of putting it in a box and locking it away and salting the earth with it, now I haven't looked at our chat. Do you have a moment to maybe we can run through the chat and look at questions, or do you need to go?
Oh, sure. That's fine.
Okay. Susan, you tell me. I'm going to back scroll everybody and see if anybody has an actual. Thank you, Joel. Thank you, Joel, for that. You guys know I don't lean into that, but thank you, and thank you for 400 episodes. Hey, Scott. Scott's my assistant, and he said he's always loved Enterprise. I love the. Here, I'll say this. I love there's part of the thing with Enterprise at the time was people. This whole thing, and the way we conceive this, I don't think about Star Trek's timeline linearly. Like, that's so not prophets. I don't think about, to me, Star Trek is this amazing universe that's only been partly explored. And every time somebody talks about recasting a Kirk, Spock, McCoy, or recasting a Picard, I'm like, no, there is so much you haven't touched on. But to me, it's like you have this 3 or 4 level. I know you've got a 32nd century. Okay, fine. You went there. Just please explore it and flesh it out. But you've got this multi-level, multi-century universe. And it's not about time travel. It's just go to this time period and talk about what's happening now and have characters and do allegorical, but just flesh out the universe then, because I'm tired of talking about the Romulan War and not having it on screen, having it be canon and having competing versions of what the Romulan War was floating around. But so at the time I was sad. I wanted a Romulan War Founding of the Federation series, but I thought they were too invested in the old ways to do that. And then when they broke out and did Enterprise, I was like, yay, this is amazing. And then you had people, that whole thing about Star Trek's about going forward in time, not going backwards. And I'm like, 2151 is still in the future, guys.
Yeah, it could be even more relevant because it's not such a big jump, right?
Yeah. Yes, exactly. Well, you watch them learning the things that everybody else later takes. I mean, I totally got it. Now, whether they executed on it all the time, no. And you also mentioned about Manny leaning into fan service so much. His idea was that the show had been wasted. And he said, he told me this in an interview. Normally, I would say, sure, we're not going to have every show be a tie into the original series. He says, but I only wound up with like 20 slots. They took 2 of them to wrap up the Space Nazi thing. Rick had given up the keys, but he had suggested that Manny should take like 10 episodes to wrap that up. And Manny was like, no, I want to make the series worse. Like, you've spent 3 years basically doing nothing. I want to get to the Kirk time. Like, I want the show to be what everybody thought it would be. It's not my fault if you've only given me 20 shows to do it. I would have rather had 100, and we would have dropped those, what did X-Files call them, the mythology episodes?
Yeah.
We would have done the canon shows 1 every 5 episodes or something. But you only gave me 20. So I'm going to do what I'm going to do. Here's my list of what we're going to do. And he got to everything but the building of Starbase 1, I think, was the only thing he didn't get to. Anyway, I don't know why I got off on that, but
yeah, I think that the way that they did the politics in the region too was interesting. The way they kind of slowly built that. You could say like the Andorian incident, like that was kind of a canon episode, or everything about how humanity was under the tutelage of the Vulcans. I thought that was really clever.
This is one thing. I think time heals all wounds in a lot of ways. I think there was a lot of indifference. Well, it's, notoriously all Star Treks. I liked your phrase at the beginning. What did you say here? You have made every effort this is early page in your introduction. I've made every effort to set aside the lordly disdaining of the judgment fan, for whom any new Trek is guilty until proven innocent. Because that's what's happened. And the further away you get from anything, people are shocked that anyone didn't like Next Generation at the beginning or were opposed to the idea of it. And I pull out the letters from people who were like, you're just going to slap Star Trek. How dare you denigrate the memory of Shatner, Nimoy, and D. Kelly by giving us other people? And it was like, no, it's 80 years in the future. They all exist, but you couldn't tell people until they do. And now people, and DS9 was the show that didn't go anywhere. And Star Trek and Voyager was the Lost in Space of Star Trek and all of that. And people are like, what? And that's why I'm curious to get away from, put some years between us and Discovery and these Picard series, all the shows, and just see what 5 and 10 years bring. But that happened so much. Enterprise it got thin. I thought they raced along and didn't maybe have as much TOS. And I wish they'd had Manny and given more voice to the Chris Blacks and more, Manny earlier on, and given more voice to Mike Sussman in the day instead of doing what they were. Yeah. But I think there's a lot of love that's just happened the last 5-6 years or so. And sometimes streaming has a lot to do with that. And I don't know, or if it's just inevitable. Passage of time makes everything, rosy sentimentality. I don't know. Did you address that anywhere in the book? Or
yeah, I think that it is the case that I'm sorry, my voice is a little.
Oh, I'm gonna run you. I'm gonna wear you out.
It does seem like the fans are not as interested in writing Enterprise off of the continuity. I think the fact that it's been more integrated by the more recent stuff, and just the fact that time has passed. Like I joked about, do you look back fondly on Nemesis? But I'll admit that I went back and rewatched it after watching season 1 of Picard, and just the sheer fact that it wasn't the most recent thing, that it wasn't the last thing, meant that I judged it by a less harsh standpoint. Like Enterprise was doomed to be disappointing because it was like the last thing and it had killed Star Trek, and like you're going to find all the faults with it. But now that Star Trek is like back and there's so many other shows, you're just like, well, maybe I can accept this.
Yeah, that's but in the moment, and another part of this, and did you get into this at all? I didn't even think about this moment. The role that social media and 24/7 access and people spouting off, everybody entitled their opinion, and every bot and troll entitled and paid for their opinion, and what that's done versus the discourse we had in the 90s when things, still moved. You had message boards, but you still, a lot of it was word of mouth. A lot of it was, clubs and meetups and your bar friends. And that was the pace of discourse. And now we have Crazy Town.
Yeah, I think that was a big part of kind of the transition from enterprise to discovery. Like, there's a famous quote from Rick Berman. He says that people use the internet for Star Trek and pornography. And even though he knew that that internet discussion was so kind of central to fan culture, even at that early time, they really had an antagonistic relationship with the fans, and they were like annoyed at them. Like they didn't want to have that type of like feedback. Whereas the producers of Discovery, especially in season 1, the writers and actors and producers and everybody was just out there on Twitter, like interacting with people, kind of trying to clarify things.
Well, you had a generation that had grown up with it, but I'll say even in Rick Berman's time, it was shocking to me because we had Rick in Communicator magazine, and he would always have those. Well, we're very excited. It was always the excited and thrilled adjectives. It's like in Apollo 13 and Astronaut Wives Club. All the astronaut wives, we look at the news cameras and go, "Well, we're excited and thrilled." It was like those bland. But at the same time, the young kids, Ron Moore was out on groundbreaking AOL's Star Trek board, just answering fan questions. And it was like the generational split, the old school who didn't know how to handle or didn't trust all this this rapid interaction. And the younger generation then who were like totally up with it. And it's the same thing today. It was amazing to see. But the other thing is now the corporate marketing people are savvier to it, whereas also as much as the producers. Here's an idea for you, Adam. Joel's saying, hey, there's Creation in Chicago coming up November 22nd, 23rd. You should be on a panel there, promote the book.
I would love that.
Maybe we
I
can
don't know
make
who to contact. Yeah.
Well, maybe we can help you with that kind of contact. Let me Melanie said she liked Section 31, but she didn't love it. It was too rushed. One of the things about Section 31, I was still curious to see the tone because I thought they could find a way to make it work. But I think it was damned by the fact that it had been a series at first and then collapsed into a 2-hour movie. And it's almost like they had too much and they couldn't let go of it. It's almost like if they just started from scratch to try to do something, it wouldn't have been quite as painful, although it was still kind of painful. And I hated for Michelle Yeoh if it hadn't been a Michelle Yeoh vehicle, that wouldn't have happened either.
Yeah, I think that probably a lot of the things, like the tone was a little bit weird to me, but I think that's because like the tone presupposed relationships between the characters that we hadn't seen develop. Mm-hmm. And it had this kind of like banter, like they're familiar characters, and like that needs time to grow. That needs like space. I think somebody said it on the chat that it should have been a mini series. I think it probably would have been much better in that format.
Because one thing was we didn't have time to meet the characters, much less care about them. And when half of the cast died, it was just like, okay, fine. Here's an actual question for you from Melanie. The 7 themes of literature that we all had to learn in junior high, whatever, man versus man, however we PC'd it. Man versus man, man versus nature, man versus technology, man versus God was one, or maybe that's nature. Anyway, she's saying, do you think Star Trek follows the conflict, the thematic rules that way?
Yes, I do. I think that they really are always trying to, and I think more than most franchises, they're trying to hit all of those bases. I think maybe they did a better job of it in the past in some cases, but I think you could go through for all of those and find multiple episodes, even recent episodes. And I think that probably, I think in my school it was like man versus man, like an individual, man versus society, man versus nature, and man versus self. Like those were the only 4 they taught me. So maybe you had a better school or something that they could afford to do these other 3. But
differentiated, yeah. Oh, Carl says, and you did. If I shortchanged comics, I didn't mean to, because you talk and you specifically say you're looking at the comics as well as the novels, not so much about the games, because to me the games were the most peripheral until Star Trek Online. The games were the most little devoted to them, and they didn't stick around very long because platforms would evolve, and so
Yeah, I think I did have like a Star Trek computer game, and there was that parody series Space Quest. I don't really like the point and click type of games, but you're right that Star Trek Online was really important to fan culture. And one reason that I didn't do it in the book is because I felt like that's the kind of thing that to do it well, you'd have to have been there. Like I would have had to been there from the beginning and playing and like seeing how it evolved and seeing how the culture evolved. And I just didn't know how I could figure that out without just lucking into the fact that I was there. Like I think the fact that I was part of fan discussions in this particular forum when they were unfolding at the time gave me a unique perspective, and I don't know how I would have, like, if I had gone
talking
through
about
and
the
read
Reddit
all those
community.
old threads, it would have never been the same as me being like, I'm logging in the morning after the episode to try to see what people are saying. And I didn't have that with Star Trek Online. I think somebody should write about, like, even just like an informal thing, maybe if somebody wants to go to Daystrom, or if somebody was really into Star Trek Online and wants to do a guest post on my subreddit, maybe we could arrange something like that.
See that, and what totally went by me, in the same way, I was there. I remember someone showing me message boards. I remember trying to answer some questions and then realizing people they didn't care about the answers. They just, the minute I answered something or settled a debate, I would come back like once a week and they would get me on their message. It was FidoNet or something. I didn't have a computer and with a modem then to get on. This is like 89 and 90. And I would check in to see what they thought about my answer and my discussion. And it was like, they were like, okay, now over here. And they would be off fighting about something else. And I was like, oh, you guys, it's like, this is the Tellarite board. You're not interested in the answers. You just want to fight and debate. And it was like, oh, was that a preview of future online fandom or what? But anyway, it's like every generation does that. But anyway, I'm trying to see if we have another actual question. Red Shirt Bob says, sitting and listening, this is really interesting. Absolutely. Yeah. Got a whole Doctor Who conversation going on in the chat here. Let's see. Okay. Well, we got these thumbs up for Trek culture. Those new kids. Here's one. Joel says, Punk on the bus in season 2 of Picard may have been fan service, but it still fills me with joy. And you know what he's talking about, right?
Yeah, I think that, I mean, those type of funny references, like, I always have room for those. It's just when it takes over and starts distorting the story that I start to get worried.
Derek says, but quality canon and world building is the difference between good sci-fi. I guess he's saying all good sci-fi and fantasy and the DVDs in the Walmart dollar bin. It's the reason Fifth Element is a classic and nobody remembers Battlefield Earth. Well, you remember Battlefield Earth, Derek. Okay.
Yeah, I do agree that one thing that is marked off Star Trek is the fact that they're taking seriously the idea that this is a world, that it has rules and things like this. And it's something that makes it really rewarding for fans to go back to the old material.
Do you think that eventually, and eventually I mean after I'm dead and gone, because I have this thought every once in a while, because there's the QB Air drive where they're talking about a faster than light drive. It has nothing to do with matter and antimatter, much less discovering the lithium somewhere as a filter for it. But eventually, if we get a hyperlight drive and we start to approximate the scale of travel that Star Trek has, that'll be awesome. But the minute that happens and matter and antimatter and dilithium have nothing to do with it. That just shatters like we patch and retcon things along the way, or the first aliens we meet are the Vulcans, or 2163 gets here, 2161 gets here, and we don't have first like in my crazy ahead of time, I don't have to worry about this. Will Star Trek diminish? Will it become, like Gulliver's Travels or something, and just become something quaint? Or From the Earth to the Moon, the silent movie? Because eventually we will eventually get to the point where all these things are shown to be not historical, and the fervor for having a unified canon. This is crazy talk, I know.
Well, I think that, I have the date for First Contact marked on my Google Calendar, so I won't forget if I'm alive at that time in 40 years. I think I have a shot.
I'd like to know all the travel packages booked to Bozeman, Montana.
Yes. Oh, yeah. I better book my trip now. But I think that already happened. That already happened because the 90s was when the eugenics war was supposed to happen, and that was when Star Trek was at its most popular. And so I think that kind of thing, it's not really about the realism at the end of the day. I think it's about the stories and the characters and the themes that they can explore through those. And I don't think that's going to go away just because there's no such thing as dilithium, as it turns out, or that there wasn't a progenitor race that seeded the entire galaxy with human-like DNA. I think it's very unlikely that really happened.
Yeah.
Even now, but.
Well, Greg Cox did do the 2-novel set where he said, well, the eugenics wars was actually like an underground secret war that wasn't out in. Yeah,
I read those, and I was disappointed that he didn't do more to kind of weave it into the news, like in a conspiratorial way. I was expecting more fine-grained things, like Bill Clinton, bombing the aspirin factory or something, and that turns out to be like Khan's fortress or whatever. But yeah,
not aspirin at all. Derek says, I love the respectful cynicism here of questionable Trek decisions.
I think respectful cynicism is exactly the level I'm trying to hit. So I'm glad that that's coming through.
Oh, and Joel says, will the kids show be called Q's Clues? Very nice. Very good, Joel. You heard it here first, everybody. This is, thank you, Ma. It's called, they're calling it Starfleet Scouts. As much as people can do it. Yeah, according to Trek Central and some other sources that have got there. Nick Jr.'s YouTube channel. Okay, not just as a generic from, okay. Yeah, the article. See, I was hazy on those, but then they'd had the production agreement with Nickelodeon for Prodigy. So, Paramount should sell Starfleet Scout food cubes. Thank you, my figure. See, this is my thing, Derek. I kind of agree with Derek. I thought with the creative ego and everything in play at the time, Discovery started off 10 years before Kirk and Spock because Brian Fuller's original idea was to do an anthology show with the same cast playing different characters and like American Horror Story, and every, with a core cast, and every season would be a different era of Star Trek. And he wanted to jump into eras that we hadn't seen and fill in the in-between, some of the things that I would like to do, whether it's a specific event or just that time period. And like between Archer and Kirk, and between Kirk and Picard, and and the network said, oh no, we want some continuity, and we want action figures, and we want toys, and we want we're not going to spend 10 episodes and 15 and go on. So his first idea is the one that stuck. And I think in hindsight, with the elbow room of creativity they wanted, and not to find a way to like Discovery kind of does and Strange New kind of does later. I think they should have jumped to the future if they really wanted to be that unconstrained. And I'm this way. I wish they just started in the future if that's what they really wanted to do.
I think that would have made more sense. Yeah.
I feel like they were most at home there. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. I know I need to let you go. Apparently this happened while we were on here. George Wendt must have passed. Oh, yeah. Okay. Thank you, Chuck. Um, okay, I'm almost caught up here. Some people do remember Battlefield Earth, unfortunately, they're saying. Okay. Listen, I need to, transparent aluminum is now a real thing. Is it what Scotty thought it was? But anyway. All right. CERN is offering an antimatter delivery service today for real. Okay. It was a shock, Dwight. Well, you should have had better magnetic shielding, apparently, Scott. Okay. Listen, I have kept you way over time, Adam. This has been a delight. I knew it would, and I have a list of things over here. We got to half of them, so and then only touched on them. But I'm serious. I wish one of my first thoughts was I wish that. Thank you, Dwight. I had wished that we were able to somehow physically meet more often and do panels or something. But if you haven't done a convention panel, you should definitely look into some of the Comic-Cons or even being an academic, even some of the LitCon, the old school LitCons around you, because I think there's a a real hunger for some discussion on this. And I think people are, if there's been discussion about the modern shows, it's all been in the week-to-week trenches online. And there's been very little hindsight and reflection put to anything yet. And especially just kind of acknowledge the earlier years. But let's talk about this. And we barely touched on the things like the economics and delivery systems affecting. I don't know if, were you trying to take all that you try to take all of that into account, not just the creators in their own vacuum, right?
Right. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you so much. Thanks for making my 400th episode so great.
Thanks for having me.
I hope we got some eyeballs. Again, everybody, the title is Late Star Trek, The Final Frontier, and the Franchise Era. Oh, look, you've got one too. By Adam Kotsko. Again, you can look it up. The University of Minnesota site would love for you to go order it there, I'm sure. But it's out everywhere, I think.
Yeah, you can get it at Amazon if you wish.
Yeah, Amazon. And in our own ways, let's see if we can get Adam in his comfort zone and travel budget, unless people are being very generous as a promoter. Let's get him out in front of folks more often. And thank you for this step today and talking. And oops, I have really taken your time. Okay. Anyway, thanks so much. And and good luck with it. And we'll see you somewhere down the line. We'll see you again, Adam.
All right. I look forward to it.
Okay. I will let you out. All right, everybody. Oof. Happy 400, huh? Thank you to the University of Minnesota Press for getting in touch with me about having Adam on and sending me a review copy. It's the first time I've been frantic to get a book read in ages. Partly for the deadline, but partly because I was curious to see what somebody did with this kind of a the point of view, what they were doing, what they were trying to do. So go over and show Adam some love. Dr. Kotsko, yes, indeed. He's there in Chicago area. Let's see if we can get him to something around. And yeah, I think the creation there would be a good step in November, if nothing sooner. Yes, I'd love to be at a live con convention, have a couple other people on the panel and talk about some of these things in depth. I had so many other questions that I knew we wouldn't get to because I thought we were only going to be on for 30, 40 minutes, and he was very gracious and kept on. So everybody, thanks so much. Thanks so much to Adam Kotsko for being on today, but thank you too for being with me. And I don't know, I don't know if anybody here, because number one, Trekland Tuesdays Live, number one was retconned that a week later because I went on live to talk. So the audience for number one was very tiny because it wasn't announced. I just went on, I think, and reacted to the first Disney trailer, Discovery trailer, but also I reacted to the reaction to the first Discovery trailer because it was a wake-up call for it ain't 2005 anymore. 2017 was, and we know that now. But I just want to say it's been a long road getting from there to here. And one of the things is my current Patreons, I want to thank all of you guys and gals and peeps. So that means thank you to Chuck A., James Kerwin, Diana Hopkins, Halberd Gunnjonsen, Lawrence Todd, Greg Wickstrom, Mitch Keith, Andrew Jazimski, Justin Weir, Joshua Patton, Pranakasha Productions, Chris Jiggins, Keith Rombach, and Comedy Forecast. And also, our live wires, our $10 Patreons a month. That's Jesse at Crusher Convo, Chris Garris, Rob McLean, Byron Bailey, J.R. Poole, Gary Williams, James Durovich, Dave Gregory, Dan Leckie, and Casey Shafsky. I did everyone's name for the 400th. Yay. Hey, everybody. I really do appreciate that. I have a very simple Patreon. Here it is. It's just $5 and $10. The 5 and 10, you get a shout out. As you just saw, the $10 get access to the earlier years of Portal 47's guest. They're all still cool. They're just a ways back, and they've been sitting on the shelf for a while, but they're all still awesome. A few folks have passed since we had them on Portal, including Robert Butler, who was my very first open house guest who directed The Cage. That's all there. That wraps up the end of the month is when you get charged. It's very simple, / Trekland Live. Would appreciate you going and helping us out here as we head into we're into the eighth year, and now into the 400th episode. Of course, if it's a Tuesday as it is today, that means there is a new Trek Files up as well. It's another one with Mike McDermott, Demerit. My brain is frozen. That conversation with Adam was amazing. Yeah. The Trek Files is up. You can find it at thetrekfiles.com, which is our Memory Alpha page, which is now also an archival. You can scan all 12 plus, 13 plus seasons. Today's is with Mike Demerit, more about wacky tales garnered through the clues of the call sheets and production reports from Voyager and Voyager Enterprise days. Check it out. And remember that you can get on our Trekophiles Tonight live Discord show, which will be, next Monday. We'll be there on Memorial Day at 4 p.m. Pacific, 7 Eastern. If you're at home and getting over the end of your Memorial Day Monday, hopefully you had one, join in with us. And you can get access if you just go and, you join the Mission Log Patreon to get to the Mission Log Discord, but it's $1 a month. And then you got access to all the Roddenberry shows and their audiences and their live shows. It's really a wacky community, a creative community. Okay. Separate from my Patreon, but it's $1 a month and you get a lot too. It's a pretty good bargain, especially when they're, both together. But maybe you can join us Monday live, and that's just about Trek Files and our episodes and what we're doing. And I probably can't help myself, and I get off on tangents there too. I get off on some Portal 47 worthy tangents at times, and I shouldn't. Save that for the Portales. Hey, everybody. I think that's about going to do it for us. You know where to find me socially. Socially, I'm at Larry Nemechek on Twitter and X, and Blue Sky especially. And it's Larry's Trekland, combination thereof, on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube. If you haven't already, please like and subscribe, ring the bell, do all the things here on YouTube. And we're approaching summer. I've had 2 tours already this month. If you would like a customized away mission from the real life Star Trek outdoor location sites of Southern California, thanks to Picard, there's now over 50 famous and infamous ones, right? TreklandTreks.com is your answer. We'll pre-plan it the best we can. 4 sites, fast food lunch. I'm your concierge chauffeur, prop and camera wrangler, whatever you need to have an awesome, memorable time visiting the sites that you want to see in our Trekland Treks format. Please give me a call. It's going to be an awesome year that way. And right now, with all our talk today here on TTL, as we do every Tuesday with Adam as a guest, 400 shows, all that I do, all that we all do. Yes, this is entertainment. It's also diversion. It's good, as Dr. Ali would have said on Life Support Live. It's also healthy. that we have an outlet for our imaginations, and sometimes we do have to take a break from the realities, the crazy realities of this world that we do care about, but we do need a break. And the breaks we can find inspiration from our pleasures, real inspiration even, like Star Trek. And like Star Trek has been since the beginning, from the tumultuous 60s onward. Um, nothing superfluous about that. Nothing superficial about that. It's healthy. It's healthy to enjoy as a relief. Maybe not to go live there 24/7, but it's a relief. It's great to have Star Trek as one of our psychological touchstones, right? So thank you for this special 400th episode. We'll be back with 401 next week. Yeah. A little interruption in schedule, maybe in later June, but for right now, we're sailing right along. It's so great to have you all here in the chat, and I'll see you later on. It'll be on YouTube too. If you're watching now, again, on YouTube, jump in now and leave a comment if you will. I'll get on there, and other people will pick up the conversation too. It's always great to have you here live, though, if you can. And that does it for show 400. Please, everybody, enjoy your treks. We're counting down to Strange New. We'll watch the rumor mill, see what's going on right now in this newsless time as we approach Strange New Worlds and see what's going on all the fronts, and as we approach con season. Looking forward to San Diego and Vegas and SoonerCon in late June. We'll see what happens on all that. But until then, and until next Tuesday, and until I see the Portales a week from Wednesday with the great Rob Bowman in part 2, please, everybody, stay healthy, do all the things, stay woke, check your sources, and trek well, everybody.